Hi, riders. Welcome back to Ride Between the Wines. This week we have an action-packed, fantastic episode. I'm speaking with Ian Burch, winemaker at Archery Summit, which is in Willamette Valley, Oregon. Such a fun, cool, interesting guy. Got a little geeky and just talked about all the amazing stuff they're doing out there. So very enjoyable. Thanks so much, Ian. And then at the end of the episode, I'm speaking with Josh Taylor in a brand new segment called, we don't have a name yet. We're working on that. But it should be a lot of fun. So buckle up. Let's ride.
The world we live in is an amazing one, full of passion, wonderment, and of course, fine wine. This is the story of one man's journey to fully understand and appreciate that world. So kick the tires and light the fires. It's time to ride between the wines.
It's Burgundian in style. Just a whisper of cherry.
Very nice legs.
This is so perfectly balanced.
Such an old world style.
Is this laced with tobacco? A total fruit bomb.
I say, Ponzi!
Thank you. All right, guys, welcome back to Ride Between the Wines. I am very excited to introduce Ian Burch, who's the winemaker for Archery Summit. Hey, Ian, how you doing?
How you doing? Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so excited. So I have to tell you a couple things. First of all, I'm absolutely in love with Oregon. I think Willamette Valley is some of the best wines that's produced in America. I've done one or two audio podcasts. You might be my first video podcast since I moved to video where somebody from Willamette's been here. But man, I absolutely love the stuff up there. I'm really excited about talking about the Chardonnay because I feel like that's the amazing grape. Ian, I feel like, we can talk about that, but I feel like Chardonnay doesn't get its due, and maybe it's starting to finally get it. But thank you. Maybe we could just start off and you tell me who you are, how you got into winemaking, and how you got to Archery Summit, I guess.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so, I grew up Catholic, so I think there's always that sort of mythical drink that the priest is holding in front of the entire church. And, as you know, if you're Catholic, you get to start drinking them a lot sooner than the rest of the world. So I always had this sort of affinity to wine. It seemed like everybody in the Bible got to drink, and if you showed up late to work, you got paid the same as everybody else. It's like this beverage is pretty cool.
It's Jesus's first miracle, right?
I know.
If it wasn't for water to wine, we wouldn't even know who that dude was.
I know, seriously. Could you imagine if you made water into whiskey? I think the world would probably be a lot different.
It's very
but
true.
You always have to pick something in this world, and I think I learned pretty early on that. I forget who told me, always work like somebody's looking over your shoulder, pick something and be really good at it, because, something better comes along. They're going to ask whoever you worked with and worked for how you worked. And it's like, all right. So I picked wine early on. I went to this awesome school, Oakmont High School, go Vikings, and I remember junior year, everybody's filling in college applications, and I was just trying to figure out what to do. And thank God my chemistry teacher brought up viticulture one day. And I remember popping my hand up and asking him, what's that? And he's like, it's the science of growing grapes. And I was just flabbergasted.
Wow.
It's like, you can do that? You can study that? And he's like, yeah, you make wine. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing that. So,
so cool. My high school did not tell me anything about making wine. Bible Belt, though, so it's probably part of it.
It's so funny. This is the same teacher that got suspended for teaching kids how to make dry ice bombs out of dry ice and water, just
Nice.
closing them up and throwing them and scaring people.
I love it.
So he had a pretty good reputation. Mr. Gin, actually.
Shout out, Mr. Gin, wherever you are.
Thank you, Mr. Gin. I owe him some wine. I actually tracked him down, and I'm going to send him some wine and thank him for, kind of leading me on this path.
That's
But
awesome.
I don't think I'm going to steer far from this path. After high school, I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo and studied wine and viticulture.
Mm-hmm.
While I was actually in Australia doing my first internship, I got accepted to Cal Poly. So I kind of, you work in progress. I'm doing an internship. I did an internship at Penfolds.
Uh-huh.
And
cool.
had one viticulture class under my belt. I knew like that's kind of the way I wanted to go. So yeah, I went to Cal Poly, graduated with an emphasis in viticulture, and got the wine and viticulture degree. And then I was off to the Loire straight after college.
Wow.
Taught myself how to speak French, Pimsleur speak and read essentials. Just plugged them into my my headphones, zipped off to class, and just all the important stuff. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, pretty girl, wine, red wine, white wine, left and right and straight. So, I picked up that pretty quickly. I forged my documents so that I could get the job in France. They asked if I had ever had French like lessons or classes. And I had my unofficial transcript. I signed up for the class and printed out my transcript. And then I deleted it because I needed to take another ag class to graduate. So, I mean, it worked. Yeah,
that's great.
It's an amazing world. I mean, I've worked in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. I've worked in California, but I've been in Oregon for about 10 years now, or actually even more, 2008, 12 years. I have 19 harvests under my belt from working abroad and in Oregon. And yeah, I have an affinity for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. They're the wines I like to drink. I feel like they show terroir very well. I mean, Riesling, I think, is on the list. Chenin Blanc, Syrah. I think those varieties, to me, really show place. And I really like how Oregon kind of frames these varieties. And yeah, I'm still learning. I'm thinking about harvest coming up. And you always you get into this mode where you're like, oh, like it's here, it's coming. Like, I don't know.
Awesome.
I don't know. Yeah, but it's like, no, I do. Like, like the fruit's looking good. We got the labor. Got all the fermenters.
How many harvests is this for Archery Summit with you?
So this will be, I'd say 18, 19, 20, my third harvest.
Third harvest. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it's incredible being part of this group. I mean, Gary Andrus started Archery Summit, back in 1993. He had this idea about the Dundee Hills. I think the Iries had already sort of set up shop, Domaine Joanne. There was like this sort of calling for him to Oregon. He had the lens of Napa, like he built Pine Ridge in Napa. So he definitely had his winemaking chops. He was just a very large personality, was able to pull a lot of capital and very keen investors his way. And he looked at this hill in Dundee, and they had to kind of kick off people living in trailers and build their faux chateau winery that is currently still all gravity fed. We can use gravity to do nearly everything. And the coolest part is the end of the quarter mile of caves underneath the building. It stays cool all year long. If you're freezing cold in the winter, you run down there and it's actually kind of nice, like 55 degrees. And then the summer, if you're walking around the vineyards and you're smoking hot, you walk down to the cellar and cool right down. And it's just such a good environment for the wines. Like wine barrels are no different than wine bottles. They don't like big temperature spikes. It gobbles up sulfur. It can make them a little more volatile. And I think if you have like nice humidity, nice temperature, your sulfur levels stay intact. And yeah, I think the wines definitely mature differently. So it's like walking into like an art shop and having every like piece of equipment you can ever imagine, all your paint and paper and brushes, and you can essentially create anything you want. It feels really good. I'm the fifth winemaker to work at Archery Summit, and it's a nearly 30-year-old brand now. So it definitely still feels like good. Like I feel privileged to be there, and like the people I work with are incredible. my associate winemaker has been there, and I'm going to probably butcher this now because I've been there for a little while, but he's, I think, 15, 16 years.
Nice.
Our vineyard manager's been farming in the Dundee Hills all but 1 year of my life. And, you know, I've got like the coolest enologist. Anthony's like the most hungry dude that you've ever met. And he knows a lot about a lot, you know. And my cellar guy, Brandon, who's probably the most humble guy in the world, you know, he used to be a day trader. So he's just like, has this incredible ability for numbers, and he's meticulous about everything. So I love it. It's the best thing I've fallen into, and yeah, I'm not planning on going anywhere for a while. It's a great place to be.
I love it.
That's a little bit about me and about archery, though. Just to throw it out there.
No, that's great. Yeah. So you said you did Australia for winemaking. You did France for winemaking, Loire, South Africa for winemaking, California for winemaking. And of all of those, your favorite is where you are right now? Not just Archery Summit. I imagine that's amazing to work for, but just getting to work with the Burgundian varietals and the terroir and all that, that's really your favorite?
I think so. I mean, when I was trying to like whittle it down, you know, you have opportunities. Like I worked in France. I did one harvest in the Loire, and then I did 3 in Burgundy, and I actually lived in Burgundy, actually in this little chateau behind me. My wife and I moved there. It's so cool. Like I thought the place was haunted someday. You know, you like walk home at night after a couple drinks, and there's like statues in the courtyard. It's like, you know, it's like that. There's like somebody walking around. This place is so big, and we're just like 2 tiny little people in it. But it was such a cool experience because, you know, in the new world, things are a little bit more calculated to me. You know, you clean everything really well. You kind of are building things from the ground up. Whereas like in Europe, people have been doing things for so long. I feel like the most basic question is sort of answered already. You walk through the streets and you drink people's wine, and you know, they don't talk about clones or rootstocks or, you know, like fermentation mechanics, and they will, and I think they do because it's nice for people to learn, and it's great to teach, because when you teach, you learn more, I think, a lot of the time. But I think, you know, working in Oregon's awesome, and I like working here just because, like, I think compared to a lot of the other winemaking places in the world, America pays better, you know, like that's part of it.
I'll give you that.
Yeah. My wife won't leave her family. So, you know, they're in the States, so I can't think too far out of here. But I think some of the most memorable moments I've had have been in France. As you go through the routines here, and then you go to Burgundy and you're in somebody's cellar, just like freezing your face off, and they like start talking about some barrel that they used, or the fact that they store their barrels full of water and then empty them out and then fill them with wine and lose 0.5% of alcohol by doing that. And you're like, what? Oh,
that's
I never thought
interesting.
about it.
Yeah.
It's just these little things. And I think that the more you progress during your career, those little things can change the course of everything you do. And it's creating those opportunities to go and talk to people, and you know, don't pretend that you're like a know-it-all pants, you know, like be open to feedback, make your wines with intent, and get out there and taste and talk. And I think a lot of those like pivotal moments that I've had in my career have been, you know, in Burgundy and in the Loire, just because here, I just lost you. There we go. Just because, you know, you're able to kind of see things just through a different lens, you know. It's awesome to go. I was actually planning on going to Burgundy this year. We're working on getting a trip out there. Fintan, who's the winemaker at Chamisol, he makes, you know, Burgundian varieties, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, awesome rosé. And we are starting to put an itinerary together, and then COVID starts like Pac-Manning its way around the world. It's like, oh man, So we were so close to going. But yeah, I think Oregon is fantastic. And there's a lot of really intelligent, I'd say dynamic, tenacious people that are making awesome wines. You know, it's a very sort of say like jovial and connected group of people. And I think everybody kind of makes sure that, you know, we're all taken care of.
So
you can give your people feedback.
I've heard before from maybe David Adelsheim or somebody, I've heard that in Oregon, there's a pretty big meeting of the minds with winemakers maybe once a year, and you taste other people's juice and give tips and all that. Is that something that you enjoy and you're part of?
Oh, totally. It's awesome. You know, in particular, we've got the Chardonnay technical tasting, which is, you know, very sort of nerdy, production oriented. You know, we usually have one ambassador organize each AVA. It's like, all right, Chehalem, like get us a neutral barrel sample, and we want to know everything. You know, you get all the chemistry, pick date, clone, rootstock, elevation, and then you know, send in like a neutral sample. Try not to do any new oak, and then all the AVAs will send their wine. So generally, I'm guessing here, but you probably have about 40 different wines. You walk into the room, and there's a series of large tables, and you sit at a table with like 10 people, and then you all say, okay, I'm gonna go taste all the wines, and you can taste them by elevation, or you can taste them by clone or rootstock, or pick date, or pH, crop load.
Awesome. Yeah.
So then you get back to your table and you're like, I tasted crop load and I don't know if I could find a difference, you know, or I tasted by crop load and oh my gosh, like low crop Chardonnay, I think is tasting a little bit better this vintage than high crop. And, you know, somebody will have an anecdote or an experiment that they've tested out, and, you know, the room just sort of like buzzes. But then, you know, you can say like, I didn't really care for that wine, or I think this wine was really great. What did you do? And I think it's those conversations where, you know, by submitting your wine, you're telling people to dissect it, and everybody's ready for feedback. And it's super cool. It's probably one of my favorite getting togethers of the year.
Well, honestly, I mean, I mentioned I really love Oregon, but the wine scene, but that's one of the things that I love so much about it. Like if you go back and you look at the story of, you know, the first, you know, 6 or 7 families who are out there who were trying to make Willamette happen, and how it was no competition. If one of us succeeded, we all succeeded, you know, and I love that about it. I think it's a very cool story.
Yeah. That pioneering spirit. I mean, I can't imagine just like, you know, if we need something, you just call up the local wine shop. It's like, I need a butterfly valve and like a pack of bacteria, you know, it's like, hey, no problem. Come on over. I mean, back then it's like, oh, you gotta figure it out. You know, you gotta get out. You're gonna MacGyver everything to work. So it's definitely a different time, and I think we have a lot to owe those first pioneers of Oregon.
Plus the fact that they worked so hard to legislate themselves, I thought was so interesting. You know, that they actually said, okay, you know, while there's only 10 of us, this is a good time to say, we're not going to, you know, label it if it's less than X amount Pinot Noir. And if it's from Willamette, it says Willamette. And I think all that is such an interesting way to get started. I think that's what makes the story so cool in Oregon, very much to me.
Definitely. Making it resilient. I mean, you mentioned David Adelsheim. He, in my mind, is still like one of those people that it's putting a ton of time and energy just protecting Oregon, you know, because there's a lot of attention now coming into the state from California, from abroad. You know, we have more water, less fires right now, less fire impact. I mean, and that can easily change. But in terms of, like you're saying, varietal influence, percentage of different varieties going into a wine, you know, trying to make a more pure expression by not having like 25% Syrah and 75% Pinot and Silvaner and Pinot Noir. It's like, we're really trying to steer the opposite direction. And yeah, people like David are, I think, protecting us immensely right now, which is cool. Even today, you know, it's he's a like a pioneer, and he's still like going strong. And I think he really cares about our industry still.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I don't think I can listen to you talk much about Chardonnay anymore without me tasting this. It's been staring at me the whole time. Can we get to
Awesome.
this? I want to have a little.
Yeah. So I'll pull it up. So are you on the 17 right now?
I am. I'm on the 17.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, this puppy it's still in really good shape. In terms of intent, like I always write down what I want my wine to be, and then I make it, and then I taste it against, like Nielsen data or like the cool kids that are making Chardonnay that we like to drink and aspire to be like, and we taste all of our wines double blind. And then, I'm there with my boss, Nicholas Kie, incredible guy, master of wine, who I just saw you interview another master of wine the other day, which is super cool.
It was very cool. Yeah.
Mad respect for those people, because they have a broad sense. Yeah, like they know marketing, sales, winemaking.
Yeah, there's I think he described it. Mark last week described it as every facet of wine, from the laws to the how you make it, why it tastes like this, everything. And I thought that was terribly interesting.
It's so cool. I mean, it informs every decision you make, and it just makes making decisions a lot easier. But, when you're tasting with him, especially, and you're, either dogging on a wine or building a wine up, like you always got to make sure you got to your vocabulary, because sometimes like the whiny dog is your own. I had it happen to me recently. It's like oh shit, it wasn't that. Well, maybe what? Oh, you can't go back.
Right.
But the Chardonnay, I mean, we feel like the way we're making Chardonnay right now is working. I'd say we build it for longevity. I'm not a big like oily, viscous, buttery, blousy Chardonnay guy. I'm more of an angular Chard guy. After working with Dominic Lafon, he was our consultant winemaker at Eveningland, where I began my career in Oregon.
Okay.
And I worked there for about 7 years. And, it was like Dominic Lafon, consultant winemaker, who makes wine in Polini, Montrachet, Meursault. And he's got like Pinot Noir from Volnay and Pommard. And then he also makes a boatload of Chardonnay from the Macon. And he's in the Pouilly-Fuissé. He's popularizing those areas as well. But, he came to consult for us, and, everybody in Oregon, I think at that point, was picking Chardonnay at a much higher Brix level, kind of like waiting for it to mature, to just become, I'd say, a little bit more like tropical and way more fruity tooty, and planting Chardonnay. And I'd say like less than ideal places. It's like, we'll put Pinot right there in that perfect spot. No, we got some place down here. We'll put Chardonnay there.
Almost like an afterthought.
Yeah. And it's like, Chardonnay, what can it do? As I think, back in the early 80s, there was this clone, this Dijon 108 from Davis, that everybody thought was like the bee's knees, and everybody planted it. And we had a string of cool vintages, and a lot of the fruit didn't even come off the vine. And the fruit that made it into bottle was a little acrid and not balanced. And I think the clone didn't really work well. So there was more of a diversity of Dijon clone available in the mid 90s. So people started putting that in. And that was the exact clone that was at Seven Springs. It was like a mid 90 planting. Dominique came in. He's like, okay, we're picking at like 21.5 Brix. I think the fruit's ready. Seeds are brown, 13% potential alcohol. The vineyard manager at the time was like, what are you doing? You get too early. And then, that's just part of like all of the vital steps, I think, that goes into making a tasty Chard. It's like, just knocking it out of the park with the pick. But there's a lot of little things that you need to do, I think, to keep that Chardonnay interesting. And, I think when you're starting out with like a kind of I want to say a thinner frame, but because you're picking on the earlier side, I feel like there's opportunity for that wine to kind of build. And, we press it with a champagne press cycle, so you can get a lot of nice phenolic content. We keep it in barrel for about a year. so that, the wine can kind of soften out a little bit. We let it go through 100% malolactic.
Okay.
So you get some of those like nice sort of lactone, some of that creamy sort of factor, but you also have an incredible amount of acidity because you've picked on the earlier side. And then at the end of all that period, we put it into stainless. So we take all the wine, all the lees, put it into stainless steel. And by doing that, you mix it all up and you get this incredible sort of umami dimension to the Chardonnay. And I think that, all these little things kind of stack up together to make something really, I'd say really interesting. And I do feel like, you still have quite a bit of life. I think like when you say malolactic, people are like, oh no, I can't stand butter and cream. It's like, but don't think about it from the sense that there's like a bunch of alcohol and there's a bunch of ripeness. Like our wines are like lemon, lime, citrus, like they've got lots of white tree flower on the nose, and we're going for angularity, not something big and chubby. I don't know. We really try to stay away from that.
Well, yeah, it's delicious. Yeah.
Thank you.
As far as you're talking about the ripeness and the tropical notes, there's a lot of fruit here, but it's not banana, pineapple. It's not something you think of as a very ripe fruit. It's much more, well, you just said it, but lemon and lime are the fruits that come out first.
Totally. Just looking for something, I think that's like persistent on the palate. We look for, something that will stay in bottle a little while. I think even our Chardonnays, when they hit the market, like we're tiptoeing like from the 17s and into the 18s. Mm-hmm. And, I think the 17s are going to be showing well. I think they're going to hit their stride in 5 years, but I think they'll last as long as 10 years.
Well, the acid is plenty to last for a long. This tastes like it, but also, you mentioned the conversation about 100% mallow, and this isn't at all a smell of butter or something on the nose. It adds a little, maybe a creamy texture, but it's not at all something that I would put in that category of something that I would say was 100% mallow. If I was just tasting it.
Definitely. I agree. And even with our oak selection, we do about 30% new oak. So, we're looking for like just a kiss of oak. I think the oak that we select as well isn't extremely compact, or it's not impactful. We look for oak that just sort of like subtly holds the wine up. And I think in this Chardonnay in particular too, in some wines I like to make things like slightly perceivable, but with this wine, we try to make all these different components kind of pull. It's like almost like a spider web. So like not one thing is pulling the wine too far. So it just kind of gives you something to think about and to question. It's our definition of balance, but I think with the Chardonnay, I don't like anything to stick out too much.
Yeah, no, it's very much like the orchestra. It's just beautiful music, not a third violinist, It's exactly what I'm getting out of it. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm really happy. I'm really happy with how it came together. Chardonnay is just one of those things, like you're constantly kind of, wondering if like your press program is doing like what it should. And it's like, can I hang more fruit out there? If I do less fruit, like it might intensify the wine, but am I just like chopping fruit on the ground for the sake of nothing? So,
nothing, right.
It's when we start making more, I'll be able to start experimenting more. But right now, I feel like I've found my groove. And if Mother Nature serves us up something different, you always change what you do stylistically to kind of like curve with the season. But I really like how our Chardonnays come together, and I like drinking them too.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think it's great. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you're talking about some of the variations and things. So you've only been with Archery Summit. This is your third harvest, I think you said?
That's right.
So do you anticipate or are interested in changing up clonal variation, rootstock, anything like that? Or are you pretty happy with what you're getting as far as all that's concerned?
It's a great question. I think on most of our sites, I think the combination of clone and rootstock work really well. I think now that we're dealing with warmer seasons, on average, we're seeing, higher degree days, and I think the conditions are getting hotter for growing Pinot. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, can we plant other varieties to kind of combat climate change? And I'm thinking we're doing Pinot Noir very well. I think we've been on the margin as a viticultural region for years, and I think we're like right in the middle now. We're in the hot spot. I think that we're on to something great. I think, out of all 5 of our vineyard sites that we own and farm in the Dundee Hills, I think Arcus, which is our largest, and Red Hills have a really nice sort of clone and rootstock variation. I mean, out of all 80 acres that we have like 72 different clone and rootstock combinations.
Is it all American rootstock?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, we typically 101-14 and 3309. They're both like semi-devigorating, phylloxera resistant. I guess the only one that I'm not terribly nuts about is Riparia, which is more shallow rooted. And when your top soil horizons are depleted of water, and you get into the last part of the season, like if you've got a really dry year, it's really hard to get water into that soil like profile and like kind of give those vines their last drink. We end up pulling it off, and I feel like that rootstock, no matter what clone we have on top of it, tends to behave a little bit differently. It also allows us to kind of stagger our picks because those shallow rooted rootstocks generally come off first. So it helps us.
Makes it easier in the hole. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can like, it's like let's Riparia first, like, and then 101-14 and 3309, we can kind of space off into the rest of the harvest, so we're not all jam packed with fruit at the same time.
Are you all having to deal with hand picking? Is everything hand picked too, or do you have?
It is.
So yeah, getting the labor has got to be intense when the whole valley's trying to grab the same people at the same time, I'm sure.
It's tough. I mean, and you've got the pandemic right now too, where it's like there's a lot of people that live in the same house, and we have a lot of procedures to just make sure that everybody's safe. And like as we kind of tiptoe towards harvest, you're just like, please, like I hope that everybody just doesn't like make out and hug each other too much. It's like just like keep our distance, guys. Like let's just be smart about this. But we have 5 people of our own, and they're incredible. And we work with a contractor, and they supply us with labor, and we've got a very strong relationship with them. And we tend to pick on the earlier side too, because I like to keep freshness in my Chard and my Pinots. So we tend to be earlier on the curve. And then especially this year too, I'm trying to pick like early in the morning, or late at night, so that it's cool. People aren't like overexhausted. And, the company that we work with actually likes that too. It's just because like they can schedule us in the morning and then just kind of roll into like a morning pick and then call it a day. So, we're strategizing all those things right now. But it's hard when you're like, come to my really steep vineyard and run up and, pick into buckets. It's like, it's a tough place to incentivize. And we try not to do too much picking in our really steep sites all in one day. We try to stagger those things so that people aren't exhausted and then people want to come and pick for us.
Right. Well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's a good call.
Totally.
Well, I do want to get to the Pinot, and there's a couple other things I want to ask about, but I want to take a second because this is so funny, but it popped up on my phone this morning, the 1 year ago where you were, whatever. And the 1 year ago for me was actually at Archery Summit, which was great. Yeah. So we went, myself, Aaron Harris, who's a supplier that I'm close to, and Michael Kramer, who's like my boss's boss is way up there. And we visited Archery Summit. The things that I remember outside of how delicious the wine was and how gorgeous everything was one, you guys were nice enough. Gigi, I got to give Gigi credit. Gigi. he hooked us up with this a nice guest house, as well as getting to visit the winery and everything, and hooked me up with you today. So I love that.
Awesome.
But just so gorgeous to walk out every morning and literally see what, you always hear about fog until you actually see it. If you're from where I'm from, it's not really even close to what it is, but just getting up in the morning and seeing how thick it was everywhere, and then seeing hot air balloons in the background. I don't know what that's about. And then just watching it slowly burn off. So that's one thing that I love, just how gorgeous it was. The other one was at Archery Summit, we were in one of the fermenting room, because there was tanks everywhere, but there's a ping pong table, and somebody there just beat the heck out of me and Aaron. And I guess that's what you guys do in your downtime, but that was a fun memory too. I kind of wanted to share that.
That's awesome. I bet it was Brandon. You had kind of quiet.
He was definitely quiet. Yeah.
Yeah. Brandon's like the maverick. He's good at tennis and ping pong. He'll definitely take you. He's a very humble guy. He just is like, yeah, like let's play. Like, pop, 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 pop.
See, I'm the opposite. I'm not humble, and I thought I was great, and I was not great next to this guy. I might have got 1 or 2 points, literally.
It's so funny. Yeah, we got to get that ping pong table out more. We've just been like, very careful about where we work and how close we are. But I mean, hey, come on, it's ping pong. Like, you're like, what? I should know this. It's like 12 feet apart or something. But
yeah, it's a good distance. But when I play ping pong, I'm screaming and everything else. So it probably is still a bad idea right now.
It's so funny. Well, I'm sorry I missed you. I was probably traveling or something.
No, next time I'm out there.
Oh, for sure.
But so kind of moving on, there's 2 other main things that I would love to get you for. Is one, I want to taste through the Dundee Pinot Noir. But the other thing is, I would like to hear a little bit more about the sub-AVAs that you guys are working in and kind of the differences that you find between them.
Definitely. Well, I think, for us in particular, we're really whittling it down to Dundee Hills.
Okay.
We work with Yule Amity, and I love that because that's where I kind of cut my teeth in Oregon, and it's such a fun AVA. Chardonnay-wise, there's, I think, a little bit more verve in the Chardonnays in Yule Amity compared to the Dundee Hills. There's just a little bit more of that intense electric acidity. I think the tendency to get overripe is difficult in Yule Amity. But in Dundee, I mean, with our 5 different vineyard sites, each one of them behaves so different from the rest. Like Arcus, because it's rockier and it's multi-aspected. So you've got, east facing, west facing, south facing, and then little sort of together aspects that you undulate. But essentially the whole vineyard's like a V, where you drive into the top, go down, go back up, and then they kind of peel off of that V. So that in and itself has a lot of sort of more like, I'd say, like heady, textural, darker profiles. And then you go into Red Hills, which is literally just down the street, south facing, really deep, jory soil. And that tends to be a little bit more fruit focused. I'd say the fruits are like just a lot sexier. The vines are healthier. So it's like, I would say healthy vines, healthy wines, like it just, everything just comes off the vine beautifully, behaves wonderfully. And then we've got our 3 vineyards that are right around the winery. So the winery is on Summit Vineyard, and Summit tends to have like deeper soil. We're south facing there as well, but the fruit profile, and I think this is where clone comes in. I think the clonal selection at Summit is a slightly more monolithic than it is at like Red Hills or Arcus, for instance. So it's one vineyard I think I can kind of tweak a little bit with, the clone and rootstock variation. So we're just taking out a few rows every year and incrementally planting to like keep the vines healthy and young, keep their vascular tissue unclogged by, any sort of pathogen. And then we've got 2 vineyards that are right next to Summit called Renegade Ridge and Archer's Edge. One's higher and more west facing. So Renegade Ridge tends to be a little bit more angular, more orangey, more citrus. And then Archer's Edge is like the ripe kind of cinnamon bayer, and it's cool having all these different pieces. And like I was saying earlier, like 72 different blocks that we get to mix and match and ferment in 3 to 5 ton ferments in oak, concrete, and stainless steel. So there's just a ton of interconnectedness. And I mean, that's essentially what our Dundee Hills is. It's a bunch of micro ferments from these multi-faceted, multi-layered blocks from our sites.
Do you find do you find that each year your makeup from block to block is pretty similar in this particular wine, or is it really all over the place depending on the vintage?
It's a great question. I mean, I think that's like my boulder, you know, like finding out what blocks have the most to say every year. You know, if the berries are small or large, if we have some botrytis or not, you know, looking for consistency. And I always call it soul, you know, like you like acid, tannin, color, you know, you like polyphenols. And it's like, does a wine have a little something extra? And those things are hard to put your finger on. So as much as it's like tasting berries and, you know, like running around and like figuring out like, oh, that's really good. It's numbers. Mm-hmm. So we're pretty disciplined with like, okay, this block made it into our single vineyard. This block got blended, and it got into our single vineyard like 3 years in a row. So we'll start to kind of treat some blocks a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. And if our vineyard manager's like, hey, I only have time to do this today, it's like, go in the block that we think is a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And then we'll work in the other blocks later. So I think the Dundee Hills generally is a higher percentage of Arcus and Red Hills just because those two vineyards are our largest. Mm-hmm. It's always going to have more of those just because it's a sheer numbers game. But it sort of just depends on, you know, how the blend comes together. Because unlike the Chardonnay, I do like the Dundee Hills to be a little bit more approachable. Mm-hmm. I like it to live a while. Like I want the consumer to kind of like get a little bit more bang for their buck and have something tasty to drink now, but also something they can lay down in their cellars for a little while. Mm-hmm. Finding that line between ageability and approachability is always difficult.
I'm sure.
But something to mention with the Dundee Hills too, I don't know if you perceive it, but I like to interlay a whole cluster. So I find there to be like this nice sort of spice component to the wine. Whole cluster is one of those where it's like malolactic fermentation. You know, if you say malo, people are like, whoa. So whole cluster is another one I think where people are like, I don't like that. Uh-huh. And it's like, well, as a winemaker, you know, I treat it a little bit differently. I don't know that I allow it to really jump out there a lot. I try to make it a little bit more nuanced, but I do about 30% whole cluster on average, which essentially means, for anybody that doesn't know what that means, you know, we have a destemmer that you put a cluster in, and it breaks off all the berries and it picks the stem out. We throw the stem out, we compost it. But with whole cluster, we take that destemmer unit out of the way and we just allow the cluster to go on the sorting line. We take out bad ones and then boop, it just plops right into the ferment. So you get a little bit more of that green component. A lot of people bury their whole cluster in the ferment, where they'll do all their whole cluster first and then they'll put all their destemmed fruit on top of that. So as you start fermenting, that whole cluster is sort of trapped on the bottom. And when the wine starts heating up, that's when you start getting extraction, because you have more alcohol, and that warmness is a huge contributing factor to how much you're actually pulling out of the fruit. So what I like to do is I like to keep the whole cluster on the very top of the ferment. So I'll destem all the stuff down here, keep the whole cluster on top, and then I'll pump over my wine. And the only time that the wine comes into interface with that whole cluster is when it goes over the top. So it's almost like I'm making a tea, mm-hmm. But then as soon as it starts warming up, then I'll start to pump over, and that area that I'm pumping over, I'll punch at the same time. So you're barely just kind of getting that whole cluster into the wine, like you're pushing it in and extracting it just a little bit. And when you get to that stage of the fermentation, the whole cluster is no longer green. it's browned out. So you get more of that sort of like brown spice. It's more like cinnamon, cardamom. It has more of like a kind of an Earl Grey tea sort of component. But I think it makes the nose a little bit more interesting, and you don't pick up on a lot, or you don't pull a lot of that like harsh, like green,
Not at
short
all.
chain tannin. So that's something, I mean, I'm constantly testing that out, and like what vintages to do it in versus other vintages. And, you know, that's one of my like intrigues right now. It's like, okay, how are we going to incorporate whole cluster this year without allowing it to take over the characteristic of the wine?
So
It's fun.
So in the whole cluster, you're actually putting, like you say, the whole clusters are in on top outside of the punch downs, but they're in there and they're literally fermenting inside of the grape, carbonic maceration style, and then they're literally going to explode at that point when I guess there's too much CO2 in it and explodes into everything else.
Usually you help it. You usually will help it break up. So by like pumping over for the first half of the ferment, you keep those berries intact.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we pump over and punch down, you're getting that cap wet. And then when you get your punch down tool, you're essentially punching that berry down in that cluster, and you're still keeping it intact because you're going very slowly.
Okay.
So you're getting the extraction of that pump over, and you're also macerating and extracting by punching, but you're doing it in a hyper gentle fashion. We coined the term. It's because in French, a pump over is romotage,
Mm-hmm.
and a punch down is a pigeage. So we call them a romo pigeage, where like you're doing a pump over and a punch down at the same time.
I like it.
It's more labor intensive because you've got somebody holding the wine hose and then you've got somebody punching. But if I can swing it each year and I've got enough labor to do it, I love how it extracts. And because we're picking on an earlier schedule, like I feel like we can extract more. And then the Dundee Hills in particular, I feel like lends itself to extraction. Like you can extract more from the Pinot. Whereas with fruit from Eola Amity, I feel like you have to be very conscious about not taking too much.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the Pinot Noir and Eola Amity tends to be a little bit more wind beaten, and the skins are a little thicker.
Mm-hmm.
They're darker. And even though it's the same soil, this is both Jory soil with lots of iron, lots of clay loam, I feel like Dundee lends itself to, extracting. Yeah, it's so much fun. It's so much fun.
I know. I can
things.
just feel your passion about it the whole time you're talking. I'm so happy I got to sit down with you.
Yeah, this is great.
And taste it. I mean, it's delicious. Do you do with, so you guys do some single vineyard stuff, right? Or single block stuff, the more higher end things?
We do. So we make 5 single vineyards. Arcus is in wholesale and distribution. So that wine, it's kind of like our flagship. Like they're the oldest vines we have on any of our properties in 1973 planting, own rooted vines. And then we have our Red Hills bottling, also single vineyard. And I think, I'm always kind of back and forth between those two. They're the largest. So there's, I think a lot of, pressure there to like make them really speak and make them really tasty.
Mm-hmm.
And then Renegade, Ridge, Archer's Edge, and Summit Vineyard. Those are all club wines. And, I can be a little bit more, I won't say experimental, but like Summit's more expensive. So I kind of make one a little bit more beefy. I tend to like put a little bit more stuffing into it.
Do you play with whole cluster with all those also?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Oh, that's so cool.
I think the only vineyard that I probably would consider backing off a little bit on, just because I like the way it behaves like without a lot of whole cluster, is Summit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one consideration I have going into harvest this year. But I mean, again, this year is going to be a whole cluster year. These clusters, like a lot of them are like, they're tiny. Mm-hmm. And then on the clusters are these little tiny berries. And if you put one of these clusters through a destemmer, it's just going to be like, and just, you're going to end up with a rachis with a bunch of broken berries on it. That's going to go away. And then underneath the destemmer, it's just going to be a bunch of mushy stuff, I think. I don't think we're going to get a lot of really clean berry removal. So I anticipate, when we have larger clusters come in off certain blocks, I'll probably destem those. And then with smaller clusters, smaller berries, we're probably just going to do whole cluster ferment on those. So
do you ever do 100% whole cluster?
I do. On one of our wines, we actually have a wine called Whole Cluster. And historically, it's been like 70% or 90%. So when I came in, it's like, we're doing 100. Like,
we're going to call it. We're going to do it.
Let's do it. So it's at the 18 and 19. They're lovely. And it's fun, too, because people put their nose into it, and they're like, what the heck? Like pickled jalapeno, and it has like this really nice spice. And, we have a way of tempering it because of how we extract and how we kind of build the ferment. So I don't make it too punchy, but it's cool to show people like, all right, this is what happens when you do 100% whole cluster. Like, this is what it smells and tastes like. It's super fun.
Well, I love it. I look forward to trying the whole cluster at some point.
I'll send you a bottle.
Please, definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for the time. Keep up the good work. I love what you're doing out there. The wine's delicious. And people at home, I'll tell you probably the next segment where you can find some of this stuff. But check out Archery Summit. It's delicious.
Hey, thank you, and thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. You're such a. I love your show. I watch it often, and yeah, I feel honored to be on today. And thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
Nah, you love it. Thanks, man. So, welcome back to Ride Between the Wines. I have a brand new segment this week that is going to replace the local restaurant segment until next week. And so I'd like to introduce my friend, Josh Taylor. I'm Mike Wine Guy. I guess you're going to be Josh, the sensible bartender.
I think sensible might be a stretch, Mike.
Well, and that brings us to our next. So Josh, longtime industry vet, obviously from the service industry here in Columbia. In addition to being very knowledgeable about the industry and bartending, the world of beer, he actually has his name carved in not one but two of the bathrooms at the Wig. And if you're local, you know exactly how amazing that is.
That was a real defining point in my life. I really felt like I just made it in the Columbia service industry scene when my my name was on both walls.
I don't know that there's a higher thing that can be said of somebody. I mean, it's. I don't think I'm on either of them.
I'm fairly certain at one point my name was on the wall in Art Bar as well. Yeah.
So if you ever go to a bar anywhere in Columbia and Josh Taylor's name is not written somewhere, come on, let's get on that.
Yeah, or you're just in the wrong place. Like, please do not
That's
put my
a bar
name.
You shouldn't be in.
Yeah, don't put my name on the wall and like say Chili's or Applebee's. Let's stay away from those.
Yeah, just put his phone number. All right. So anyway, this new segment is going to be called. We actually haven't come up with a name for it yet. I'm thinking seriously, or you got to be kidding me? I don't know.
We'll come up with something.
It's going to be clever.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have you guys help. We'll see.
We might. I mean, you have intelligent followers.
We should have done this podcast a long time ago. So anyway,
that was just a shameless plug for popularity for me.
Oh, you follow me?
I do.
So here's the idea behind the segment. As somebody who is behind a bar weekly, and as somebody who has worked in restaurants and with that scene for years, we all know there are those people who make rookie decisions, or just things that don't think everything out. And we're not mocking people, but sometimes it's funny. And
I'm mocking people.
And Josh is actually specifically mocking people. So with that said, I'm just going to check in with him every week and tell some of his favorite gripes or weird things somebody has decided to do this week.
So I didn't know until this year, because I've never bartended on the lake before, that like most bars and restaurants, their amateur hour days are Halloween, St. Patrick's Day, New Year's Eve. A lot of industry people won't go out on those days because you really do get the worst of the worst. The people that normally don't drink at all are out there ripping shots or, chugging a bottle of champagne.
It's interesting.
But I've never worked on the lake before, and I've come to find out that holiday weekends like Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, those are the amateur hour weeks or days for lake bars. This past weekend, Labor Day was a prime example, and I encountered way more stupidity condensed into a shorter time frame than would normally be the case on any given Saturday and Sunday. Some of my favorites, actually probably my favorite, it's something that I honestly have never encountered before, was when I was going to close out someone's tab and I'd say, "What's your tab under?" Now, I'm hoping that most of you out there in internet land, or whatever we're going to call this, would know that, so my name's Josh Taylor, what's your tab under? Taylor. This weekend was like, what's your tab under? Jeff? Jeff. All right, that's what I'm going with. There's like 7 Jeffs here, Chief. Which Jeff are you? And it didn't just happen once. It literally happened 5, 6, 7 times. And it was my coworker that was with me that day. We were just dumbfounded. We were staring at each other. I've never ever encountered that in all my years in the service industry. So that was a fun one.
Yeah, that's
One thing I have encountered before, and it did happen a couple times this weekend as well, is that it's the red card. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're very self-assured. You can get away with that with the black card, maybe. I don't know that you can.
No.
How often do you get a peering over and it's like, oh, it's that one?
Not very often.
Yeah.
But at that point, I definitely question
Exactly who it is. Yeah.
Is this really your tab? Or are you like, oh, well, that one's only like $8.75. I'll pay that tab.
I like it.
So one interesting thing about the 2 places I currently bartend in, shameless plug, and you're welcome, Brian and Andrew. I work at Keg Cowboy in Lexington, and I work at Fishwater Beer Garden out on the lake in Leesville. So both of those places are very craft beer centric, and neither one of them has a liquor license, so it's just beer and wine. Going back to the whole amateur hour, not really knowing where they are thing this weekend, I had one guy walk up and he asked me what scotches we had. And I said, well, I'm sorry, we've only got beer and wine. And I kind of, asked him what he normally drank, and those 2 things, he said, I only drink really good scotch. And I just kind of stared at him because I didn't know my next move on that.
Did you not have any hidden scotch under the table?
I did not. In fact, there wasn't like
illegal at either of these bars.
There wasn't a secret handshake or like a passcode he could whisper into my ear and be like, "Ha, you're good, man. You're in the club. I'm gonna go unlock the vault and bring out the scotch now. Thanks for playing."
That's great.
I said, man, we've only got beer and wine. And once again, he repeated, but I only drink scotch. And I was like, you might be at the wrong bar. Yeah. I'm not trying to be rude. I will gladly serve you anything we have here, but I just don't have scotch. I don't have any liquor at all. At one point, I'm not going to lie, before it became funny for me that day, I got a little bit of rage building.
Yeah.
And a guy walked up, and I'd just gotten through telling the 3 people in front of him we didn't have liquor. And
all 3 of them were Jeff, too.
All 3 Jeffs. One of them was the Geoff, the Geoff.
You're not fooling anybody.
But I'm a loud guy, and there was music playing, so I was very, very much projecting. So he was definitely within hearing distance of me yelling, unless he was deaf. And if he was deaf, then I apologize, bud. But he said, "What's the closest thing that you can make me to a tequila sunrise?" And I just dead-eyed him and said, "Not a goddamn thing."
Wait, I wasn't listening. Is this the Scotch guy? This is
This
a whole
was
different.
a whole
Okay,
different
okay.
guy. This was like, just
Like
one
Scotch
of the.
guy really doesn't get it.
No. I think this guy was behind Scotch guy, or in the general time frame. And it's fine. We don't always know what we have. What each place serves.
Of course.
But if I point blank tell you I don't have liquor, then I don't have liquor.
Right.
And that goes back to the thing, like I said, both places, both Keg, Cowboy, and Fishwater are both very craft centric. Both places offer some, some choices. Like Keg Cowboy has Narragansett Lager and Labatt Blue, to kind of like, for your domestic drinkers. And out at Fishwater, we generally have at least one craft lager on tap, and then we've also got a Founder Solid Gold Lager, and we've got Red Stripe in the bottles.
Huh.
Lake Bar, Red Stripe. Generally, that pleases people. Not always. When I tell people we don't have domestics, I have a Bud Light. Sorry, man, we don't have any domestic beer. We're craft centric, but here's these 3 options. Well, then I'll have a Miller Lite. Yeah, sir, we don't have domestics. These are our options. Coors Light. And I was like, oh, you caught me. We've got Coors Light. We've had it all along. I was just fucking with you. Wait, am I allowed to curse on this?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because
I wouldn't have even invited you on.
Well, that's like I have 2 friends of mine when they answer the phone, they say, "You're on speakerphone and the kids are in the car."
Genius, yeah.
Yeah, and you 2 know who you are.
Well, this is Josh Taylor. And
It is.
You're going to see a lot of him.
Cheers, guys.
So, cheers. Chin chin.
Drinking my
Oh,
Coors Banquet as we talk about.
I thought you were going to
craft
say
beer.
Red Stripe. I thought that was a Red Stripe. Isn't that a
it's-
Red Stripe bottle?
It's a similar, it is a similar shaped bottle, and I've never really thought about that before. I don't know the actual connection there. Maybe there's not one.
Hooray beer. That's the right
Exactly.
people, right?
Yeah, it is.
Everybody here is younger than that. All right, signing off, sir.
Thanks, y'all.
There you have it, another episode down. Thank you so much to everybody involved in this episode. Obviously, thank you to Ian. Fantastic to get to talk to you for a few minutes. Your wine's delicious. Go out and try Archery Summit wines. Seriously. Thank you to Josh Taylor for your time. Thank you to State Street Pub for allowing us to do a filming there. And thank you to you. I appreciate you watching this. Please tell your friends if you're listening. Either way, I appreciate it. If you're watching, press the little logo up here, my face, subscribe, share, like. Other than that, we'll see you next week when we're talking to Melissa Stackhouse, the amazing winemaker out of Sonoma, and we're talking about Simi Winery. So, till then, chin chin.
Cheers.